Hi, good evening, everybody. Hope you can all hear me okay. I think everybody should automatically be on mute, but if you aren't on mute, could you please make sure that you are? We will have an opportunity at the end of the presentations to ask questions and have a bit of a Q&A session with us all. But in the meantime, if you do think of any questions as we're going along, either keep a note of them or pop them in the chat box at the bottom, and we can cover them off at the bottom at the end of the presentation. So I think we've got quite a few people already in and joining us, so I think we'll just get started. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining myself and the rest of the team from Head Medical for this seminar. It is a specific seminar for junior doctors and registrars who are interested in going to work in Australia and New Zealand. For those of you who maybe don't really know about Head Medical and who we are a specialist medical recruitment agency based in Scotland and normally based in Edinburgh, but at the moment we are all working from home. And we were the first UK-based agency to be established to help UK-based doctors relocate overseas. And we've been doing this since 2008. The first countries that we started recruiting to were, in fact, Australia and New Zealand. So they have been our core markets since day one. And over the years, we've helped over 1,400 doctors relocate. And during this time, we've created a really good network of doctors that we obviously have helped move, clients in these countries as well. And we make sure that our employees, our recruitment consultants, have an opportunity to go out and meet with these hospitals, because we want to make sure that we are actually working with really good hospitals and medical clinics, people that we feel comfortable and confident about placing you with. We're also benefit from having one of our recruitment consultants being based in Wellington in New Zealand. So Caroline is out there. She recruits our consultant level doctors. And we also have other recruiters and staff within the company who hail from Australia as well. So we have a huge amount of experience that we've built up over the years, not only for the medical world jobs, what it's like to work out there or make the move in terms of the process, but also to offer practical advice as well. We've been doing these events for about 6 years now. It's not a sales pitch because we can't convince somebody to move, but it is just an opportunity for us to share with you our experience and expertise. The process, it can be quite complex. It's not quite as bad for junior doctors. The process is a little bit more simplified, but we have an in-house team who will help you with all of the medical licensing to get you ready to work in these countries. And we also have our in-house licensed immigration advisor for New Zealand, Emma, who will help you with the visa as well. So over the course of the presentation, I'm going to pass you over shortly to Leona, who is our junior doctor specialist recruitment consultant after both Australia and New Zealand. And then she will hand you over to Gemma, who will walk you through the licensing and visa process. And then we're joined today by Elisa Thompson, who works in the hospital that we work with in Gisborne, New Zealand. So she'll be able to tell you a little bit about the location, about the hospital, and sort of upcoming requirements that they may have over the next sort of year or two. And then we'll finish up with a Q&A session. So, keep your questions till the end, or as I've mentioned, you can put them in the chat box at the bottom there. So what I'll do, I will pass you over to Leona now, and she can tell you a little bit about what it's like to work in Australia and New Zealand, and a bit about the recruitment process.
Thanks, Nikki. Hi everybody, great to see so many people here tonight, so thanks for joining us. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of information about both countries, Australia and New Zealand, just in case anybody has maybe never been there before or doesn't know much about them, and a little bit of information about the recruitment process, what the requirements are, etc., before I hand over to Gemma, who will talk about the registration and the visa process. So I'll start off with Australia. If you can just flick to the next slide, thank you, Sam. So just to give you an idea of how big Australia actually is, so it's 32 times bigger than the UK, with a population of just over 25 million. So if you compare that to the population of the UK, which is 66 million, it shows you, it just gives you a bit of an idea of the scale of the country. It's split into 8 states and 2 territories. So we've got Northern Territory, Australian Capital Territory, WA, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. And as a company, you know, we've worked across all locations there. We tend to not work for the junior doctors, we tend not to work in the major city centres, just because the hospitals there get so many direct applications at that level. So the hospitals that we work with tend to be sort of 1 to 2 hours, you know, out with those locations. We sort of call them regional areas, and we do a lot of work up, you know, for example, like the Queensland coast. In the major cities, it tends to be more at a higher level where the demand is, so at registrar and senior registrar level positions. So out of all the states, you know, they're all very different in terms of lifestyle, climate and cost of living. So they're all very different depending on what part you go to. And they've got around 128,000 doctors working in Australia, and that's including overseas trained doctors as well. So just a little bit about the Australian healthcare system. The government and the state and territory governments share funding of the public hospital services there. The Australian public can access care within the public health system for free or at a lower cost through Medicare. And the government offers a tax rebate to people to take out private healthcare policies on top of their state coverage, and that's to relieve pressure on the public system. If you can go to the next slide, please, Sam. Thank you. So the job types that we recruit for, they are house officer, senior house officer, registrar and senior registrar. So you would need at least 2 years postgrad clinical experience. So if you're from the UK, you know, you would be eligible after you've completed your foundation programme. House officers and senior house officers are equivalent to sort of postgrad year 3 here. They also have principal house officers over there, which is the equivalent to the UK postgrad year 4. And then a registrar is from postgrad year 5 plus. We also sometimes get qualified consultants who would want to go out as a senior registrar, and the reason for that is they don't have to go through the college process, which can be quite lengthy and expensive. So it's lower cost to go out as a senior registrar, and it's a quicker process than the consultant process. And people want to do that. They sometimes choose that option just to test the water out, you know, go out and maybe for a year to see if they like it and if they like the environment before moving out long term. So we do have quite a lot of that situation. The salary bandings for these job types differ from state to state. So each state has what they called a medical practitioner award. And yeah, they differ slightly in terms of what's offered. So for example, Queensland and Western Australia, they will earn more, or they'll pay more there, sorry, than the likes of Sydney and Melbourne. So that's just something to take into consideration as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the recruitment campaigns and the recruitment process there. So in Australia, their medical term runs from February through to January. So February is their main intake, and their mid-year intake is in August. So that works out quite well in regards to the UK graduates, you know, who mostly finish up their foundation programme in the August, and then they'll tend to go out and start towards the end of August or the beginning of September. We start to recruit around 6 months in advance, sometimes a little bit longer for Australia. So the whole process from getting a job offer to basically getting your visa and going out there can take between 4 and 6 months to complete. So that's something to take into consideration, as well as time before that to apply for jobs and to have interviews. So the process would be, you would apply for a position, or if head medical are assisting you, we would assist you to look for jobs that, you know, are in line with what your requirements are. You would, if you were selected for interview, we would help you prepare for the interview process. If you were successful at interview, we would then be required to get references. The hospitals then ask for quite specific documentation that they require, and they also require you to get a list of your vaccination records. So there's certain vaccinations that you need to get before you go out there. So that would require you to get those from your GP beforehand. Once we submit all those documents to the client, they then sign that off, and that's what generates a formal job offer for you. So there's quite a lot in the process there that you need to take into consideration before getting a formal job offer. And depending on the hospital, that can sometimes take up to about a month, depending on how quickly you work to get your documents and also how quickly the hospital work as well. Once you're through that process, other types of documents that you would need to progress into the registration part is you would need a copy of your medical degree, certified ID. There would be a health and character questionnaire that you need to complete to make sure there would be no issues with you getting a visa or medical registration. A police check and evidence of completion of your internship or FY1, and also a certificate of good standing as well. So that's a sort of summary of documents that you would be required to have. Location, sorry, I've covered that in an earlier slide. Yeah, we work across different locations, but tends to be more a registrar or senior registrar for, you know, closer into the city centres, but a lot of hospitals, you know, will be in regional areas, which will be a couple of hours out with those main cities or up the coast. Training programs. Now, we get a lot of questions about how to get onto a training program over in Australia. You have to have permanent residency there, and you have to have general registration. So it can actually take quite a long time to get onto a training program there. If you're offered a job by a hospital there, you will go out on an employer-sponsored visa, and usually the hospital will require you to work with them for around 2 to 3 years before they will consider sponsoring you for permanent residency. So just to give you an idea of the time that it would take for you to get that PR there. Once you have that, then you would be eligible to apply to get onto a training program there. Now, each specialty has specific requirements, so the best thing to do would be to visit that specific college website for details of what those eligibility requirements would be. Okay, next slide, please, Sam. So now just a little bit about New Zealand. So it's around the same size as the UK, but has a population of around 4.9 million, which is around about the same as Ireland, just to put it into context for you. And the country is split into 2 main islands, North Island and South Island, along with around 600 smaller islands as well. They have over 17,000 registered practicing doctors there. More than 40% of those have trained overseas and have come from more than 100 countries. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the healthcare system. So New Zealand does receive healthcare through a mixture of public and privately funded services. The public healthcare system is mainly funded through taxation. The public system is mainly free or heavily discounted due to government subsidies. And some people also take out extra private health insurance as well. And there are 20 district health boards, and they are responsible for funding the provision of health services within their district. And they range from a population of 32,000 right up to 630,000, which is the largest DHB. Next slide, please. So again, the job types that we recruit for there are house officer, senior house officer, registrar and senior registrar, although they don't tend to sort of call them senior registrars as such. It's mostly just registrar. Again, you need to be eligible. You're eligible after completion of your FY1. However, most hospitals will require you to have completed your FY2 as well. A registrar in New Zealand basically starts from a UK postgrad year 3 plus. That can sometimes put some of the UK doctors off, you know, the job title is registrar, but it is a sort of junior registrar, so to speak, but you would go in at the level based on what your experience is. So the salary bandings there are based on basically your number of years experience that you've got, your clinical experience, the location of the job that you're going to be working in, the category of the job, which is basically the number of hours you're required to work per week as per the job specification. And they have out there what they call a MECA, or they have 2 MECAs basically for the junior doctors. They are what's called a multi-employer collective agreement, and essentially it forms the basis of your contract out there. So there's 2 to choose from, and it's a personal choice which one you want to go on, but there is a difference in salaries. So the MECAs are called a Stones MECA and RDA MECA, but just to give you a bit of information, so the Stones MECA has a higher level of salary, but less rostered days off. So most people at the moment, I think, tend to go for that one, but it is a personal choice. You can find, you know, the details of both MECAs online, or, you know, we can give you that information as well. There's quite a lot of detail on it, but it basically gives you information about what your contract would be in terms of allowances and rosters and hours worked, etc. as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the recruitment campaigns and the process there. So the start dates usually would be November, December time. That would be their main intake, and their mid-year intake would be May, June time. But this year it's been delayed slightly due to COVID. And so this year the main intake started in February this month, and their mid-year intake will be in August. So it lines up now actually with the Australian process as well. We're not sure at the moment whether the colleges will revert back to the original start days. We haven't had any word of that as yet, but at the moment it would be sort of August time and then a start date of January, February time. Again, we recruit up to 6 months in advance just to allow time for interviews, getting documentation collated, getting references, and going through that registration and visa process. So the process is quite similar. It tends to be a little bit quicker in New Zealand than what it is in Australia. So you would, you know, sort of apply for jobs, do your interviews. You must have 3 references up front. So a lot of hospitals will want to see your 3 references before they interview you. There's very specific requirements about the references as well from the Medical Council, but we can advise you on what those are as well. Interview and then sign off, and then a formal offer as well. Documents that you would need to collate are quite similar to Australia, so you would get a police clearance, you would need your ID, your medical degree, again, a health and character questionnaire to make sure there's no issues getting registration or visas, evidence of your internship, and also a certificate of good standing. Locations, we work with most of the DHBs out there. We don't work with Auckland for junior doctor positions. They do all their own recruitment, but we do work with most of the other district health boards. And again, with training programs, you need to have permanent residency there in order to be able to apply. And again, it would come down to what the college requirements are as well. With all the documents that are required, our registration team will assist with the full process. So they will support you through that. They'll let you know what documents you need to get, what ones you need to get certified, and what parts of the forms that you have, you need to fill in as well. So they will support you through that whole process. Next slide, please, Sam. So there's just a couple of testimonials here. These are from candidates that we have out working in Gisborne at the moment, who we'll hear from a little bit later. So we placed quite a few junior doctors in Gisborne last year, and most of them are still out there working at the moment. So it just gives you a little bit of an insight into what they have enjoyed there, but mainly the feedback from junior doctors that go out there is that that it's really opened their eyes to a different working environment, a different healthcare system, different ways of doing things, which has really expanded their knowledge. It's gave them experience of a different culture there, which they wouldn't have got over here. They've taken on, more responsibility, and also just the work-life balance is a big thing for them out there. Being able to go to the beach straight after work, or to do some travelling on their off days. New Zealand's quite easy to get around, so a lot of junior doctors do that on their time off. They go exploring and travelling about to different places. So those are some of the main benefits that doctors feed back to us when they go there. Okay, so I'll hand you over to Gemma now, who will talk about the registration and the visa process.
Thanks, Leona. My name is Gemma Evans, and I work with Head Medical as a licensed immigration advisor. So I'm part of the registration team that supports our doctors through the paperwork side of things. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of what you can expect from the regulatory application process in both countries. So the technical, more onerous part of the process, but it is an essential element and the part that will usually take the most time for you. But that's exactly why we're here, to navigate and support you through that process. So I'm essentially going to cover all the boring bits for you. We'll move on to the first slide, please, Sam. So we'll start with Australia. There are three main applications that form the overall process of obtaining medical registration and immigration approval in Australia. So you'll see from the slide, the first one is an application for primary source verification of your qualifications, which for juniors is just your primary medical degree. It's a fairly simple online application. We encourage you to start that as early as possible, as it can sometimes take a little while for your medical school to respond. So the earlier you can start that process, the less likely it is to cause delays further down the line for you. The second one, and really the main registration application, is an application for provisional medical registration to the Medical Board of Australia, which is part of the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, as I've referred to on the slide. And then finally, we would submit your application for a temporary business-sponsored skills shortage visa for you and any dependent family. So Head Medical's in-house regulatory team will guide you through the full process. We complete the majority of paperwork on your behalf, and we would liaise with the Medical Board and the Department of Immigration on your behalf throughout the process. And all in, as I think Leona referred to, it takes in the region of 3 to 6 months to complete. Next slide, please, Sam. So to give you a little bit more detail on the two main applications, once your verification application has been submitted, the second stage is to submit your application for provisional medical registration to the Medical Board of Australia. Provisional registration applies to people who are qualified for general registration but are also required to complete a period of approved supervised practice before they are eligible for full general registration. So we use it to gain registration for international medical graduates that are eligible for the competent authority pathway, which I've outlined on the slide for you. The competent authority pathway is for international medical graduates that are non-specialists and have completed both a prescribed assessment component, so a medical course or exam, and an experience component. So for UK applicants, it would be either successful completion of the Professional Linguistic Assessments Board exam, alongside successful completion of your Foundation Year 1 or 12 months supervised practice in the UK. Or alternatively, a graduate of a UK medical programme, and again, completion of your Foundation Year 1 or 12 months supervised practice in the UK. You would be required to meet specified English language requirements, which can involve sitting a prescribed English language test. But that's something we can advise you on when we start to work with you, and will depend on your personal circumstances. Next slide, please, Sam. So the final stage in the process is an application for a temporary business-sponsored skills shortage visa for you and any dependent family with the Australian Department of Home Affairs. As you're likely aware, Australia's borders are currently closed to almost all travellers as a result of COVID. So whilst those restrictions are in place, temporary visa holders have to obtain a travel exemption before they're able to enter Australia. And you can't get into Australia at the moment unless you are an exempt category or you've been granted an individual exemption to the current travel restrictions. So you'll see on the slide there that there are two main categories that we use to gain these individual exemptions for our doctors. The first being that you'll be providing critical or specialist medical services, and the second that you're a foreign national being sponsored by your employer to work in Australia in an occupation on their priority migration skilled occupation list. That's a list that has been created in response to the current restrictions, and it does currently include resident medical officers. The majority of these travel exemption requests are being finalised within 1 to 2 weeks, and they're lodged once the main temporary work visa application has been submitted. Next slide, please, Sam. So the majority of our junior doctors will use either the short-term or medium-term stream of the subclass 482 visa. That's a temporary skilled shortage visa. Eligibility for the visa is based on your occupation being on an applicable skills shortage list. So the medium-term stream tends to be used at sort of registrar level, and it allows you to live and work in Australia for up to 4 years. And you can apply for any number of subsequent TSS visas if you choose to extend your stay. The short-term stream permits a stay of up to 2 years that would generally be used for RMO level, and you can renew that once on shore for a further 2 years. You can include your dependent partner and children in the application, and they would be afforded work and study rights as well. These visas are taking around about 4 weeks to approve at the moment, and that includes the 2-week period that's necessary for the travel exemption to be assessed alongside it. Next slide, please, Sam. So all travellers arriving in Australia at the moment have to complete 14-day quarantine at a designated facility on arrival. There's no reservation system, and the room allocation occurs on arrival just based on availability and people's needs at the border. You'll quarantine in the city that you arrive in for the 14 days, even if you plan to then travel on elsewhere in Australia. Once you've completed your quarantine, you can travel within Australia in line with the state and territory domestic travel restrictions that are in place at the time, but that may include further quarantine depending on the state that you're travelling to. You may be required to pay the cost of the quarantine. Again, it depends on the state that you're travelling into, but many of the employers are helping to cover these costs for our doctors. You'll also be required to provide evidence of a negative COVID test to your airline prior to boarding, and that has to have been taken within 72 hours or less before scheduled departure. You'll also be tested for COVID-19 during your period of quarantine. the exact sort of testing requirements being dependent upon the state and territory that you're travelling to. So that's a general overview of Australia. And if you've got any specific questions on that process, you can hold on to those for the question answer at the end of the presentation, or you can pop them into the chat function and we can cover those for you at the end. Next slide, please, Sam. Thanks. We're going to move on to New Zealand now. I'll just move straight through to the next slide, please, Sam. So in essence, it's very similar as an overview for New Zealand, and then we have a 3-step process that starts with primary source verification of your application. They use the same online portal to verify your primary medical qualification at source. We then move on to an application for provisional general registration, again with the Medical Council of New Zealand, and then finally an application for your visa, the process again taking around 3 to 6 months to complete. Next slide, please. So again, once you have successfully submitted your verification application, we'd look to collate and submit your professional registration application to the Medical Council. Eligibility for provisional general registration with the Medical Council is based on your having completed your primary medical degree and your foundation year 1 in the UK or Ireland, or alternatively you're having worked for 33 out of the last 48 months in a similar role and at a similar level to that you'll be applying to do in New Zealand in one of a set list of comparable countries that I've noted on the slide for you there. You'd also be required to meet specified English language requirements, which again may involve sitting a prescribed English language test. So as with Australia, your provisional registration would grant you appropriate registration to undertake a period of supervised practice in New Zealand before you were then eligible to make an application for full general registration. And again, our in-house regulatory team would provide full support in the collation and submission of your applications to New Zealand, and would liaise with those authorities on your behalf throughout. As a team, we do have a very well defined set of processes, quality standards to make sure that we have a consistent approach to the provision of that support to our doctors. And with over 11 years experience, we do understand the common issues and the obstacles that can present themselves for both countries. And we do have the expertise and the established relationships there to anticipate and manage those situations for you. Next slide, please, Sam. So I'll just move on to the visa side of things for New Zealand. Again, the borders are currently closed to most travellers as a result of COVID, but critical health workers are one of the critical purpose categories of people that can make a request for permission to travel as an exception to those restrictions. And at the moment, they are considered to be doctors with current or new offers of employment, with start dates between March 2020 and the 31st of March 2021. But Immigration New Zealand have been extending that date quarterly, so it's extended out every 3 months, and we're expecting them to push it out to include those doctors with start dates up to the end of June any day now. So that will happen on a continual basis to allow us to submit your applications on your behalf. Next slide, please, Sam. So the border exception and critical health worker visitor visa applications are an added step in the immigration process in New Zealand. They require us to, first of all, lodge a request with Immigration New Zealand for permission to travel. So that's us basically giving them an overview of your situation and why we think that you meet the exemption criteria. We then go on to lodge a critical purpose visitor visa application once you've been invited to do so by Immigration New Zealand. So basically further to their approval of that initial request. Your dependent partner and children can be included in that application. It takes around 2 working days at the moment to obtain the invitation to apply, and then a further 2 to 4 weeks to obtain the critical purpose visitor visa. It's a 6 to 12 month single entry visa that allows you to enter New Zealand, and it would afford you as the main applicant work rights, but your dependent family members would only be given visitor visa rights. And for that reason, once you arrive in New Zealand, we then proceed with the submission of your kind of normal longer term work and dependent visa applications, which we're not currently able to do for anybody that's offshore. So the majority of our doctors will use one of two main temporary visa categories. The first is the essential skills pathway. You can apply for that visa at any age, and there's no upper limit to that. And the visa is approved on the basis of your offer of employment, and the duration of your visa will link specifically to the duration of your employment contract. And it will restrict you to working within the post and for the employer that's named in your contract. You can obtain an essential skills visa for any duration of up to 3 years in one application, and it can be extended. You can apply for another essential skills visa as many times as necessary thereafter if you decide to stay on for a longer period. The second option is the work to residence category. You need to be under 56 years of age when you make an application for this visa under one of two separate pathways that fall under the same category. Whether or not you're eligible to apply for this visa category and which pathway you would apply under depends on whether or not your occupation is on New Zealand's long-term skills shortage list, or your proposed employer is accredited with immigration to recruit from overseas. So that visa pathway provides you with an initial 30-month temporary visa that then provides a streamlined pathway to permanent residence after 2 years of your having lived and worked in New Zealand on that visa type. So the initial work visa is in practice very similar to a standard essential skills work visa. It would restrict you to working in the position for the employer that's detailed in your employment contract, but it does provide that pathway to residence if you're looking at a longer term move. Both visa categories will allow your dependent partner and children to apply for work, visitor, student visas as suits their needs, and they're generally processed within about 1 month after your arrival on shore. Next slide, please, Sam. So after visa approval and whilst the border restrictions remain in place, you'll need to book a place in a managed isolation facility in New Zealand for your arrival. So New Zealand's managed isolation allocation system is an online portal for everyone that's travelling to New Zealand to secure a place in a managed isolation facility for a 14-day stay before you can finalise your flight. It's now a legal requirement for all travellers coming to New Zealand to have a voucher confirming that they have their place in managed isolation before you can fly, and airlines won't permit boarding without that. There's no fee for getting the voucher, but you will be charged for your stay in managed isolation. Again, many of the health boards and GP practices are helping to cover these costs for our doctors. As with Australia, you'll also be required to undergo COVID testing during quarantine, and you'll need to provide a negative test result for COVID taken in the 72 hours before your departure. Next slide, please, Sam. So in this final slide, I basically outlined the main application fees for each country so you can get an understanding of the likely outlays. But generally speaking, for a single applicant travelling without family, you'd be looking in the region of around £1.5 sterling for New Zealand and around 2,000 to 3,000 for Australia. So hopefully that gives you a good picture of what you can expect from the process in each country. There's obviously a lot of technical detail in there, so hopefully I've not lost any of you along the way. But as I said, if you do have specific queries, then type them into the chat function, or you can put them to me during the question and answer session at the end. So I'll now pass you on to Dr. Lisa Thompson from Gisborne Hospital, who will tell you a bit more about what they can offer and the positions that they will be recruiting to.
Thank you, Gemma. I'm Elisa Thompson. I'm a consultant physician and head of Department of Medicine at Gisborne Hospital. I have Elliot Green with me, who is an advanced trainee in medicine as well. And we have our medical registrar program is fairly new. This is going into our 3rd year now of medical registrars, and medicine is the only specialty in Gisborne right now at the hospital that has registrars. Next slide, please. So I've been here I'm from the US, obviously, and have been here for 9 years. In that time, our population has grown somewhat, but we are on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand, which is a rural setting We're about 3 hours by car in either direction for the next large city, and our population and catchment area is about 47,000. So we serve the town of Gisborne as well as up the East Cape, up to Te Araroa on a map there. It's a very close community, and the weather is beautiful and conducive to year-round outdoor activities. Next slide, please. So these are just a couple of photos. This was Rhythm and Vines this last New Year's. I think we had one of the largest music festivals here in the world during that time. And we're also quite renowned for our surf. Next slide, please. The hospital itself is a small hospital, about 115 beds. We have several specialties here. We have a general surgery, orthopedics department, pediatrics, maternity and child services, medicine, which is across all subspecialties, and our emergency room department. And we do have, for our size, quite a bit of diagnostic capability, including an MRI, CT, and we have an excellent echosonography service. We also offer satellite dialysis and have a medical day ward where we do chemotherapy locally. Next slide, please. So as far as our service here in medicine, we have the thing that I think I've appreciated the most is this unselected medical take, meaning anybody that comes into the hospital with a medical issue is seen by our service. It's not filtered off into subspecialties. We do have we have general physicians here that have subspecialty experience, but also work as general physicians. So that could be in cardiology and renal. We also have 2 cardiologists that work in outpatient services here, and a geriatrician. In addition to that, we hold accreditation for RACP for basic and advanced training in general medicine, and we have 9 registrars. Our registrars can be from PGY3 on up. We try to get a mix every year, but as a PGY3, it can be a bit daunting initially because it is quite, again, it's an unselected service. We're very far from any next tertiary center. So the level of experience is increased rapidly. And we do have visiting subspecialists. So our oncology service, rheumatology, dermatology, all come and visit. We also have an inflammatory bowel clinic here, and a number of other, we have a respiratory physician that is here doing bronchoscopy on site. And again, we have offered dialysis as an outpatient. So next slide, please. So in terms of opportunities, you work very closely with the consultants. We're all hands-on. We are in the hospital. We become quite familiar with all of our trainees here, both house surgeons and registrars. And again, you get an exposure to a variety of subspecialties and opportunity to work in those clinics. And so the other is we do a lot of teaching and educational activities as well, including journal clubs and clinical skills labs and RACP training sessions. All right, I think that was all. Is there a next slide? I think that might be the end. Yeah. So opening up for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. That was really great of you to be able to join us. Thanks for that overview. I think we've got a few questions that people have popped in the chat box, so I'll cover these off first. So is there any word on how Brexit will alter the visa application within 3 years' time? Will it be any easier or more difficult? I've heard that the UK will be forming some sort of deal with Australia regarding working visas. Gemma, do you know anything about that?
No, it's not information that's there yet. I'm sure those conversations have started and are going on, but there's certainly nothing that has kind of been fed down to this level and a kind of practical how it will work. So it's not information that we have at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, generally though, the working visas would be based on your qualification. Is that right, Gemma, rather than where you come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So hopefully it shouldn't have too much of an impact.
Yeah.
We would hope. Are non-medical partners on your visa able to gain admission to Australia at the moment?
Yes. Yeah. If they are dependent on your visa, they can travel with you, regardless of whether they are a medical professional or not.
Okay. One for you, Leona. What are the biggest regions in terms of population you cover in New Zealand outside of Auckland?
Well, we work with different hospitals, and it often depends year on year where the requirements are. So generally we assist, hospitals where they have a need or a demand, for candidates that that they're looking for. So, I mean, we have worked with the likes of Wellington and, Christchurch in the past. It just really depends on what the requirements are at the time. So we do work across, even the likes of Dunedin as well, on the South Island, and again with Northland, Palmerston North, Mid Central. There's a whole mix of different types of and sizes of hospitals that we work with, but it generally depends on what their requirements are. Some hospitals may only have 1 or 2 vacancies, for this time of year or mid-year, and some may have 10. It really just depends on what comes up that year, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. And Gemma, for the Australian visas, do we need to be married to our partners for them to be considered?
No, you don't need to be married. You would need to be living together and be able to demonstrate the sort of genuine and ongoing nature of your relationship. So you would need to provide documentation to kind of back up any claim to a relationship-based visa. But you do not need to be married. De facto relationships are accepted.
And another Australia visa question. If the visas are employer sponsored, does that mean you have to stay with the same employer for the duration of that visa? Is it possible to move after a year, for example?
Yeah, so the employer sponsored visas are specific to the employer that's sponsoring you to go out there and approved on the basis of that post. So you would be required to stay with that employer. There are provisions there that allow you to do other work as a medical professional outside of your main employment, but you would still have to maintain that main employment relationship during the validity of the visa. But you can apply for subsequent visas whilst you're in Australia. You don't need to leave the country before you could apply for an alternative work visa if you were to sort of move on after a certain period of time.
What is the period of time now that you have to switch between employers to give enough time to get that visa? Is it 60 days?
Yeah, it's around 60. We used to be 90 days. I think it's currently 60.
Yeah, so you can move around, but you need to be quite organised and have another employer lined up to
set up before. Yeah.
You had to come back to the UK for a couple of weeks and then re-enter New Zealand or Australia. Would you know whether the quarantine time would come out of your annual leave if borders are open at that time? So I don't think we would know that really at the moment.
I think that would have to be something discussed with the hospital, whether they would, depending on how long you're looking to take off, whether they could accommodate that plus the quarantine time. But you would certainly need to quarantine when you come back into the country. So I think that would be, taking off your own annual leave, I would assume. But again, I think you would need
for New Zealand. Sorry, Leona.
That's okay. I was just saying, I think it would need to be, probably discussed with the hospital.
Yeah. For New Zealand, how have people finding spots in quarantine? It looks like it's been consistently booked out. One for you, Gemma.
Yeah, it's proven tricky. I think at the moment it's fully booked up until the end of May. We have heard that they're releasing some additional spaces over April and May. It's really been a case of fastest finger first, unfortunately. So we've had people kind of sitting, refreshing the page on a kind of constant basis, trying to secure a space. It's tricky. I think that there are obviously a finite number of spaces there. So we just have to work with the system that's there, unfortunately. We're expecting some June dates to be released very shortly, hopefully over the next couple of weeks. I think that there's probably been a bit of a backlog from over the Christmas period. So we're kind of hoping that it will ease a bit the further into the year we go. But yeah, it's tricky. I think there are spaces coming up. We've had a doctor successfully secure a space for mid-May just this week, so it is possible. It's just about patience and perseverance with it.
Yeah, thank you. Is the visa application process for both countries the same for non-UK residents who have a UK medical degree and completed foundation training in the UK?
Say that again, sorry, Nikki.
Is the visa application process for both countries the same for non-UK residents who have completed a UK medical degree and completed foundation training in the UK? The
visa process would be, yeah.
Okay.
It wouldn't be affected by that.
Leona, do you know how many jobs are likely to come up in New Zealand this year compared to normal? I know there's likely been an impact on the intake due to COVID.
Yeah, there definitely has been an impact due to COVID this year. So with their local doctors not being able to move anywhere, they've obviously taken jobs locally, and that has meant, you know, less job opportunities for international doctors than what there normally would be. They have had an influx, you know, I know that all the hospitals have had an influx of applications and emails from people from the UK wanting to go over to New Zealand this year. So the competition for the jobs that are there is very high just now. Most of the jobs for mid-year starts, for August start dates, they tend to come from people already out there resigning to come back to the UK to start their training or to go back into their training in August. So there may well be more vacancies that come up over the next couple of months, you know, as people resign, but it has had an impact. Yeah, there's certainly less opportunities and more competition this year round, certainly.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Leona. Dennis, you are doing GP training and asking about the process for Australia. It is quite complex at the moment. I am probably the person here today that knows more about GP recruitment, but actually, yes, you can start the process as soon as you finish your training. Probably not able to start that before you finish your training. So what I'll do is I will get Vicky, who heads up our GP team, to get in touch with you directly, Dennis, and she can talk to you about the process and you know how we can get that started for you. Thank you. So me and my partner are both doctors. He's an F3 currently and I'm an F1. We plan on leaving when I finish F2. Can we link applications to the same hospital?
Yeah, we do get quite a few people going out as couples, which a lot of the hospitals like, you know, because it's good to have some moral support there, you know, when you're moving so far away. It really depends on getting two jobs, you know, that you're both happy with in the same hospital, which can be a bit tricky sometimes. But certainly at Gisborne, we have two couples there at the moment that moved out together. So that was quite an easy process for them. So yeah, it is doable, and we have recruited, you know, for couples in the past. So yeah, we can definitely help you there. Again, it just comes down to finding two jobs suitable for both of your level of experience and your speciality as well within the same hospital.
Great, Thanks. Am I right in thinking that with a dependent visa in New Zealand that they can request for a working visa once they're onshore?
Yes, that's right. So at the moment, we can't lodge these visa types for people offshore just because of the border closure. But as soon as you arrive on that critical purpose visa, we go ahead and lodge the kind of what would be your normal visa applications. So a longer term work visa application for you as the doctor, and then a dependent partner, dependent child visa for your family as suits their needs. And they're coming through pretty quickly within about 2 to 4 weeks after arrival. Some even have them approved before they come out of quarantine. So yeah, absolutely, your partner will be able to secure the work visa after arrival in the country.
Great. Another one for you, Gemma. You mentioned that essential skills visa for New Zealand is valid during the duration of your work contract. Do you immediately have to leave the country as soon as you finish your job, or can you stay a month or two longer?
You won't need to leave immediately. The duration of your visa will be variable. Some will have a specific end date, and some will kind of be valid for a certain duration from the day you arrive. But generally speaking, immigration would approve for the periods of the contract, and then usually permit some time thereafter for you to travel, holiday, and basically arrange to move on, or even to submit another visa application if you decide you're going to extend your stay. So no, you wouldn't have to depart the minute you finish work.
Okay. Leona, are there any resources that you could provide us with, such as a list of potential jobs that lets us know what province the hospital is in, salaries, holidays, packages, etc.?
Yeah, so the way that we work is if you'd like us to assist you to find a job, basically what I would do is have a proper chat with you over the phone just to get a good idea of what it is you're looking for in terms of location and job, and then I make a note of all that and I'll have that on our system so that when we recruit for jobs, I will then go through, send you out information about the particular job, the hospital, the location, department, etc. And I'll go through all that with you on the phone as well. And if it's something that you are keen on, then we would start the application process from there. We can also set you up with job alerts on our system that you receive details of jobs that we're advertising via email. So as I advertise them, you will get an email about all the details then. And that's the quickest way for us to get that information out to you. But certainly any jobs that I'm working on, I go through my candidate availability list and give all the details out to you then about the jobs as well.
Okay, thank you. I will be heading to New Zealand having just completed anaesthetic CT2, so it would be a new reg. How does this fit into the New Zealand registrar, senior registrar grades?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you would be classed as a registrar there as well, and it goes depending on the job. So in terms of salary, if that's what you're looking at, the location of the job, and then it goes by the number of years experience that you've got as well. So all this information can be found on the MECAs that I spoke about, which I can provide for you to have a look through. So it's about the level of your experience and the requirements of the job and the location of the job. So it's all sort of comes under, those sort of three main pillars, I suppose. But it's very transparent, but you would be classed as a registrar there and you would get paid according to your level of experience.
And Leona, what are the length of posts available? Are they all 1 year, or are there shorter or longer posts available?
Yeah, so a bit of a mix really. New Zealand's a bit more flexible with the contract length than Australia is. So yeah, you can get a 12-month contract. Probably a 6-month contract is usually the minimum that we would sort of work on, sort of 5-6 months, just due to the amount of paperwork, and costs involved to get people through the process and out into those different countries. We tend to find that if people go out there and they want to stay on longer, then the hospitals are really supportive of that. So they will support you to stay out there by extending your contract, you know, obviously if your performance has been good. So that tends to not be a problem once you're out there. But yeah, usually 6 or 12-month contract with the option to extend.
Great. And Connor is asking, he's currently studying medicine and his girlfriend is a nurse. Would we also be able to link applications?
We don't recruit for nurses at the moment, really, but it is something that we could speak to the hospital about for her, just to make them aware of your situation, and they would be able to advise, you know, what vacancies they have available. At the moment, it's not something that we recruit for in those countries just now, though, but we can, yeah, certainly make them aware of that.
Yeah, great. And Wishfa is looking for some information on the process of becoming a GP in New Zealand. Again, Wishfa, what I'll do is I will get somebody from our GP recruitment team to get in touch with you, and they can give you the specialist advice on that as well. So we'll get that out to you shortly. And the GMC has exception for English requirements for non-UK graduates based on working experience. How about for New Zealand?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that you can meet English language requirements. One of which is obviously English language test, and then they do also accept you're able to demonstrate continuous work as a registered medical practitioner in an institution where English was the first or prime language for a period of 2 years within the last 5 prior to application. So yeah, experience in an English-speaking country can be used to gain an exemption from those requirements.
Fine, I think we've maybe got time for one more question. Oh, just a second, I've just lost that one. Can it be difficult for FU doctors in New Zealand struggling with doing applications abroad? For example, struggling to arrange interviews back in the UK because they're abroad, Leona. So coming back to do their specialist training applications.
Sorry, can you just say that again, please, Nikki?
Yeah. In your experience, have you seen F3 doctors in New Zealand struggle with doing CT applications? For example, struggling to arrange interviews back in the UK because they're abroad?
To be honest, I haven't heard of anything. Nobody's made me aware of any struggles that they've had. I do know of people that have went out there that they've already had a training spot secured and they've deferred it for a year and then went out to Australia or New Zealand in between. But in my experience, yeah, I haven't had any feedback on that, to be honest. I think some people do come back, you know, take a few weeks off and come back for their interview. I think that's how they work it. Again, I don't think I've had anybody do that whilst quarantine's been in place. So, you know, that might be a little bit more difficult at this point in time. But I think that's generally what they would do, is take their annual leave to come back to do the interview.
Yeah, great. And I think last question for you, Leona. Is it possible to take up a post in Australia at different times of the year, not part of the standard intake cycle times?
Sometimes it is, yes, it depends. And really, it would be if there is a vacancy available that a hospital has not been able to fill with someone who was able to start on, you know, the main intake date, or if someone has resigned and that's created a gap there. So for UK doctors, you know, obviously they finish, you know, their contracts in the August, usually beginning of August, and they tend to want a couple of weeks off before they go out there. So quite a lot of hospitals, you know, they're aware of that, they're aware of the situation, so they will, you know, let them start at a little bit of a later date, you know, towards the beginning of September or end of August. It also depends on when you get a job offer as well, because sometimes with the length of the process, you know, if you don't secure a job, say, for example, until May, or June for whatever reason, you've still got, you know, between 4 and 6 months before you can complete the whole registration and visa process and get out there. So that will take you past, you know, their main intake dates, and hospitals are aware of that as well. They're aware of the process timeframes. So yes, it is in some situations, but generally it will be because they've not been able to fill a position, or it's due to a role coming up because of a resignation.
Great. Thanks, Leona. Elisa, I wondered if this is one that you could maybe help with. Is there support and encouragement for UK doctors to obtain additional qualifications and undertake courses whilst working in New Zealand?
So we have supported a lot of our registrars to go and do other programs, including point of care ultrasound or basic course, as long as there is, you know, support in the hospital and it's not impacting the work here, then we really encourage folks to go and do support them with leave and sometimes some financial support, but it's dependent upon what they're doing and how long they're staying, those types of things.
Okay, great, thanks for that. And Elliot, how long have you been with Gisborne?
I've been here just over a year now. I'm originally from Gisborne, so it's sort of home, but I've been away for some years.
Mm-hmm. So did you work in the UK for a while?
I have never worked in the UK. No. I've only done work in New Zealand.
Okay. So what would you say would be the main selling points of Gisborne for a UK doctor thinking about coming out there?
Sure. In terms of the work side of things, I think it's the breadth of experience that you get here. It's you know, if you work in bigger places and you just do a specific subspecialty job, you only see one thing for 6 months as a typical run here, and whereas here you see everything on every single day. And I think with that you get a lot of extra kind of training, a lot of support from the consultants to be able to work in that capacity. And I think, yeah, it really kind of upskills you quite quickly to be a proficient general physician, really. And then on sort of Gisborne as a whole, Gisborne is a beautiful place. It's small, it's people are nice and kind here, and the weather is beautiful and you can get outside all the time and enjoy it. So I think, you know, particularly the UK guys who've come over here, most of them are sort of living, you know, a few minutes from the beach. They head out of the hospital at 4 o'clock and go for a surf on their way home, and, you know, go have a drink at the pub by the beach, and then, you know, head back to their place. It's a pretty idyllic lifestyle. So I think that's what people enjoy the most about being here.
Yeah, living the dream sounds wonderful.
Yeah. Why I came back.
Yeah. Well, great, thank you for that. That's really good insight there. I think, you know, we've covered off quite a lot of questions there. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and thanks again to Lisa and Elliot for joining us as well. If anybody does have any other questions, you know, please feel free to email us, get in touch. We will send out a follow-up email with contact details on there. And likewise, if you've got any other questions you think of specifically about Gisborne, then we can obviously help with that as well, with the help from Elisa and Elliot and the rest of the contacts there. So thank you very much everybody for taking time out your evening, and we will be following up with all of you. So thank you very much. Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.